Westminster Abbey, in the heart of London, the home of one of the great knightly orders, the Order of the Bath. Here are the heraldic emblems of the members of this exclusive order. Each is unique to its owner. Each is personally designed to distinguish its owner from all other knights.
The whole purpose of heraldry originally was to identify people clearly and at a distance in battles and in tournaments. And if the design wasn't simple, then you couldn't see who the hell they were. You know, you'd be looking at it and trying to work out who it was. By that time, you'd have a lance through your chest.
At the Battle of Hastings, before heraldry, William, Duke of Normandy, had to take off his helmet to prove he was still alive.
Well, a number of factors came together to give rise to what we now know as heraldry, and I think it's important to remember that heraldry didn't suddenly just appear. Since the classical times, soldiers, warriors, if you like, have decorated their shields with certain devices, and indeed we see this on the Bayeux Tapestry. The knights there, the Norman knights, on their shields will carry certain devices or designs, but these designs, as far as we know, are random, they're unsystematic, they're seemingly haphazard. But then about 1100, a dramatic change seems to occur. We notice that shield designs become more systematic. It's almost as if they're following guidelines. And we can see this in the example of the Bible of Stephen Harding, which was produced before 1109, probably by English artists, where the shield designs are beginning to look very much like heraldry as we know it. In other words, geometric designs with a certain orderliness about them. And we see this again in the Chronicle of John of Worcester, dating to the 1130s, where again the shield designs have a certain orderliness about them, certain system about them. And we would call this proto-heraldry. And then a few years later, we find actual heraldry appearing. And the way in which we know this is actual heraldry is because we know that these shield designs were being used consistently by the person bearing them. In other words, he would perhaps wear them on one occasion, and he would continue to wear the same arms on another occasion. And also, and this is extremely important, that these arms were handed down unchanged through the family. In other words, they were hereditary. And it's the systematic use of hereditary devices upon the shield which makes these shield designs different from the earlier shield designs we see, for example, on the Bayeux Tapestry.
The College of Arms in London, still on the site it has occupied since 1555, is the headquarters of today's heralds, who are employees of the Queen and are charged with the task of granting coats of arms to those who ask and are qualified to receive them. In the hall of the College of Arms is the cushion used by the Queen at her coronation in 1953. Today's 6 heralds, Lancaster, Chester, Somerset, Windsor, York and Richmond, are directly descended from the medieval heralds who announced the tournaments and ensured their proper rules and procedures were kept. New coats of arms are granted and designed by one of the heralds, and then hand-painted. 5 colours or tinctures are traditionally used: blue, red, black, green and purple, together with 2 metals, gold and silver, and 2 furs, ermine and vair. Canada is soon to have its own College of Arms, and all heraldic emblems relevant to that country are being prepared for the opening of the new college. The emblems used in heraldry are a mixture of tradition and innovation.
There are traditional emblems which we've used ever since the Middle Ages: dragons, lions, griffins, things like that. We still use traditional things like anchors for the sea and so on, but we do try to introduce new emblems because every coat of arms has to be distinctive, and if you're using the same old emblems, it's very difficult to get a combination that hasn't been used before. So we try and introduce new things. I think I introduced the hypodermic syringe into English heraldry. Not for a junkie, but for a chap who was knighted. He was a medical missionary in the Belgian Congo, and he went around squirting stuff into people's backsides to stop them getting poisoned by tsetse flies, and he's also got 2 tsetse flies in his arms. But I just wanted to make the point that a syringe is a perfectly reasonable, you can see what it's supposed to be, whereas sometimes people have included objects that are not recognizable. There was a chap in the last century who invented the boiler flue, Mr. Fox, and he was so proud of his invention that the arms have got a section of corrugated boiler flue in there, and it looks, you know, looking at it now, you wouldn't know what it was. It looks rather like a woodlouse, so that wasn't a very good heraldic charge, as we say, but I think the syringe is a suitable one.
The coat of arms that was granted to Admiral Lord Nelson is not considered a good example of heraldry. But it is not only the famous and fortunate who are eligible.
I think most people, as you say, do assume that you've got to be sort of terribly grand, and we have very eminent people sometimes who say, well, I'm not worthy of a grant of arms, but in fact, anybody who has got, say, a professional diploma or a university degree or commissioned rank in the forces, or they've given money to charity or things of that sort, and they're obviously responsible people who haven't just come out of prison, and they're willing to pay the fee.
Candidates for arms do not even have to be British citizens.
We can help Americans in particular if they can prove and record a legitimate male line descent from an English ancestor, any English ancestor, or any ancestor resident in America prior to independence. In that case, they can have a grant of honorary arms, which to all intents and purposes is exactly the same as an English grant. This is the pedigree of my client, Bill Rayford, of Maryland, who wanted to qualify for an honorary or a grant of honorary arms, which he did by proving and recording his descent from an ancestor living in America prior to independence.
So now Bill Rayford, citizen of the United States of America, has his own personal coat of arms designed by Hubert Cheshire, Chester Herald. Hubert Cheshire is also secretary to the Order of the Garter and keeper of the Order's registry. When Sir Edward Heath, former Prime Minister, was appointed by the Queen a member of the Order, it was to the Chester Herald he went to discuss the fact that he had no coat of arms for his stall in St. George's Chapel, Windsor. And here are the arms granted to Sir Edward.
Those are his personal arms, which will never be granted to anybody else. There's a zigzag division of the shield. It isn't a division, it's what we call a charge, which represents the Royal Artillery tie, which has a zigzag pattern, but it also represents Broadstairs, where he was born. You can see it as Broadstairs. They're not very broad, but the symbolism is there. The green here is for the Heath, because he's called Heath. He also was keen to have purple for Heather, so it's a fairly brightly coloured coat of arms, this one. Out of one corner comes sunbursts coming out of a cloud. That represents, firstly, the fact that he took us into Europe, which he was very proud of when he was Prime Minister. And also it represents morning cloud, because he had several yachts that bore that name. At the bottom, Garter King of Arms has signed it, and this is his seal attached by a blue ribbon, suitable for the Order of the Garter, and his seal, Garter's seal, is impressed in beeswax.
Sir Edward's banner now hangs above his personal stall in the chapel, alongside those of all other living members of the Order.